So what if the main reason you can't seem to master a new skill isn't because you haven't practiced doing it enough, but because you've actually practiced doing it way too early?
Oh, that is such a painful thought for so many people.
Right. I mean, I want you to imagine this. You spend over a decade studying a really complex subject. You cram, you memorize all the frameworks, you take these high-stakes standardized exams, and you score, like, in the top
It's
percentile.
got the paper to prove it?
Exactly. You have the objective proof that you know this material inside and out, but then the very first time you were actually placed in a real-world environment and asked
Yeah.
to, use that knowledge, your brain just essentially short
You
circuits.
completely freeze up.
You completely freeze.
It's a profoundly frustrating experience. And the crazy part is it happens constantly across almost every discipline. We kind of operate under this collective delusion that storing data in our heads for an exam is biologically the exact same thing as building the pathways to execute a skill.
Right, like passing a written driving test means you can suddenly parallel park.
Exactly. We assume the paper translates seamlessly to the pavement. And when it doesn't, what do? We blame ourselves.
Right.
We think we just aren't talented enough rather than looking at the method itself.
And that exact breakdown is really the foundation for our deep dive today. We're looking into this genuinely paradigm-shifting YouTube video by the channel Kincha Shuo, and it reviews the work of this Japanese language educator named Kumiko Nakabayashi.
Yes, and it's a fascinating look at the mechanics of learning.
It really is.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to pull apart her findings and understand why our traditional, classroom-based methods of learning are just fundamentally broken. And I know the source focuses pretty heavily on language acquisition, but as we get into this highly counterintuitive 90-10 ratio she proposes, it becomes super clear we're really talking about how the human brain processes any complex pattern.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at Kumiko's journey completely upended my understanding of how we move from theoretical knowledge to actual fluency.
The cognitive principles at play here, they really are universal.
Mm.
I mean, whether you are attempting to learn Python or pick up the cello or become fluent in Spanish, the biological mechanics of how your brain maps and retrieves information remain entirely consistent.
Yeah.
And Kumiko's personal story is basically the perfect case study in how we actively sabotage that mapping process.
Right, let's start there, because her story perfectly captures that short circuit moment we were just talking about. So, Kumiko grew up in Japan, right, studying English her entire life through the standard academic system.
The typical textbook-heavy approach.
Exactly. Flashcards, grammar drills, all of it. And she takes the TOEIC exam and scores over an 800.
Which is huge.
Yeah. For context, for those who don't know, that is a highly competitive score. It indicates a really high-level working proficiency. So she's 24 years old, she flies to Canada for a working holiday, and on paper, she is incredibly prepared.
Very prepared.
But the second she steps up to the immigration counter at the airport and an actual human speaks to her, she just panics.
Complete blank.
Complete blank. She finds herself completely incapable of forming a single coherent spoken sentence.
And see, that's the thing. All of the vocabulary and the grammatical syntax, they were technically stored in her explicit memory, but she possessed no delivery mechanism.
Right.
To use a computing analogy, it's like she had a massive database sitting on her hard drive, but no software program capable of actually querying and presenting that data in real time.
I love that analogy. So, faced with that failure, she attempts a fix that I think honestly makes intuitive sense to a lot of us. She diagnoses her problem as a personality flaw.
Right, the extrovert myth.
Yes. She decides, I am simply too introverted, I need to force the issue. So for her first year in Canada, she adopts this hyper-extroverted persona. She pushes herself to go to parties. She forces conversations with locals. She's putting herself out there constantly, basically trying to grind her way to fluency through sheer willpower.
And it is a spectacular failure.
It is. She ends up exhausted. She's communicating in broken grammar. She's constantly misrepresenting what she actually means to say.
What's fascinating here is the sheer paradox of what ultimately solves her problem. Because the extrovert strategy fails entirely. But then she ends up meeting and eventually marrying a Canadian man.
Right.
Now, the cultural myth is that marrying a local is the ultimate shortcut to fluency. You're always talking, right?
Yeah, you'd think that's the golden ticket.
But Kumiko completely shatters that assumption. Her husband was incredibly introverted. They spent most of their time in separate rooms. They barely conversed at all.
Wow.
Furthermore, because she was waiting on a residency visa, she wasn't legally permitted to work or attend school, so she was effectively confined to her apartment for an entire year.
And that forced isolation is the catalyst. Like spending a year going to parties and trying to speak accomplished nothing. But sitting alone in an apartment somehow unlocked her fluency.
It fundamentally breaks how we think about output.
It really does. I mean, think about training a large language model. Her initial strategy of going to parties and forcing conversation, it's like demanding an AI write a brilliant original novel before you've actually fed it a massive data set of human literature.
Yes. Is that...
You're trying to extract an output from an empty void. You can't perform a sold-out concert before you've even learned the chords on a guitar.
You cannot output a vacuum. If the underlying architecture isn't there, forcing it only produces errors and frustration. So if we accept that isolation worked, we have to look at what she was actually doing inside that apartment.
Right, because she wasn't just staring at the wallpaper.
No, she was actively engaged in a very specific type of consumption, which forms the bedrock of her methodology, the 90-10 rule.
Yes, the 90-10 rule. So according to the framework outlined in the video, there are 3 stages to this. Stage 1 is establishing a basic foundation, so roughly a middle school level grasp of about 2,000 core words.
Just the bare minimum to get started.
Right. Then stage 2, and this is the massive paradigm shift, dictates that 90% of your total learning time must be dedicated to what she calls massive input. And then stage 3 is dedicating a mere 10% to output.
It is vital we define massive input here because the term is so easily misunderstood. This is not passive absorption.
Yeah, you can't just sleep with a textbook under your pillow.
Exactly. Or, you cannot just play an Italian radio station softly in the background while you chop vegetables and expect your brain to magically decode the language. That is just ambient noise.
Right.
Massive input requires deep, active engagement. The source material emphasizes using localized subtitles to bridge a very specific cognitive divide. Because for a vast majority of adult learners, their visual processing of a language is much faster than their auditory processing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they recognize a word instantly on a page, but when that same word is spoken at native speed with all the dropped consonants and linked syllables, the brain just completely fails to recognize it.
And the video points to television shows as the ultimate mechanism for bridging that gap. And I think the reasoning is brilliant because, textbooks are inherently sterile, right?
Very robotic.
A textbook teaches you to say, I'm fine, thank you, how are you? Nobody talks like that. A television show teaches you to say, not bad, just got off work.
Yes, the authenticity.
But more importantly, it provides the surrounding contextual metadata. You hear the subtle shift in a character's tone when they're addressing a superior versus when they're, bantering with a peer. And you get the physical gestures, which are a massive part of fluency.
The nonverbal component cannot be overstated. The video provides a stellar example of this cultural nuance regarding Japanese learners.
The corporate drama example?
Yes. Imagine watching a scene in a Western corporate drama where an employee is aggressively negotiating a higher salary, really pushing back on their boss. If a Japanese learner only reads that dialogue in a textbook without the visual context, they might misinterpret the tone completely.
Because culturally, the expectations are different.
Exactly. They might assume it's a polite resignation. Furthermore, the source notes that Japanese learners often feel uncomfortable deploying physical gestures, like shrugging or throwing their hands up, because to them it feels culturally abrasive or inelegant.
Right.
But when you consume massive amounts of television, your brain registers that the shrug itself is a crucial vocabulary word. The medium delivers the total package of communication.
Okay, but I have to push back here because this sounds suspiciously like a free pass to just sit on the couch and zone out. Wait, but if you're just watching TV with subtitles, aren't you just being lazy and letting the screen do the work?
It's a fair question.
I know plenty of people, and frankly, I've been one of them who have watched literally hundreds of hours of subtitled anime or Korean dramas, and at the end of it, we can maybe say hello, thank you, and idiot.
Right, you haven't acquired the language at all.
We are nowhere near fluent. So if massive input is the secret, what is the missing link? How does watching TV not just devolve into lazy entertainment?
That is the critical distinction to make. And the source answers this by drawing on the work of linguist Stephen Krashen, specifically his theory of comprehensible input.
Okay.
Watching hundreds of hours of anime doesn't work if you only understand 2% of the words being spoken. In that scenario, your brain isn't mapping patterns at all. It is entirely relying on the English subtitles while functionally ignoring the audio.
Ah, okay.
Krashen's theory states that input only leads to acquisition if you already comprehend about 70 to 80% of the material.
Ah, so that connects right back to her first step, having that core foundation of 2,000 words. You need a foothold.
Exactly. When you possess that 70% comprehension, your brain is not passively resting. It is operating as an incredibly powerful subconscious pattern-matching engine.
Wow.
It uses the surrounding context it does understand to automatically deduce the meaning of the 30% it doesn't understand.
That's amazing.
You aren't consciously studying. You are leveraging your brain's evolutionary drive to make sense of its environment. And Kumiko suggests that if you hit the benchmark of 200 hours of this specific comprehensible viewing, you will fundamentally alter how your brain processes the sounds of that language.
Okay, 200 hours of watching shows I actually enjoy. I mean, that is a homework assignment I can get behind.
It sounds great, doesn't it?
It really does. But the video makes it explicitly clear that while television is incredible for adopting that conversational rhythm and the physical gestures, it isn't enough on its own. Like, to build the deep structural architecture of a language, the complex vocabulary and the intricate grammar, you need a massive volume of data. You have to read.
Yes, and this is where we have to violently unlearn the habits ingrained in us by traditional schooling.
Oh, for sure.
The source delineates the difference between intensive reading and extensive reading. Intensive reading is the academic default. It involves treating a chapter of a book like an incredibly dense puzzle that must be perfectly decoded. You encounter an unknown word, you immediately stop, pull out a dictionary, translate the sentence back into your native language, and analyze the grammatical structure before moving on.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the video argues that this intensive, highly diligent approach actually destroys your ability to learn.
It completely derails you.
Yeah. They use the specific example of the word ubiquitous. So in an extensive reading framework, which is reading purely for the gist and the momentum, you might encounter the word ubiquitous for the first time and simply skip right over it because you don't know it.
Which feels so wrong to do.
It feels illegal. But your brain takes a snapshot. So by the 10th time you see that ubi prefix appear in chapters discussing tech companies or modern smartphones, your brain has subconsciously constructed this contextual web. You've built an invisible Venn diagram of meaning around that shape. So when you finally decide to look the word up, the definition existing everywhere instantly snaps into a pre-existing cognitive slot. It just locks in permanently.
And that permanent lock happens because you allowed your implicit memory to do the heavy lifting rather than forcing it into your explicit memory with a rote flashcard.
Right.
This exact same osmotic process applies to grammar. When you see the past perfect tense deployed hundreds of times across the arc of a gripping thriller novel, your brain develops an intuitive, almost physical sensation of when that tense belongs in a sentence.
It just feels right.
Exactly. It stops being a mathematical formula you have to calculate and becomes a natural reflex. When you engage in extensive reading, your brain eventually abandons the exhausting process of translating everything back to your native language and simply begins mapping the new patterns directly to concepts.
The analogy that comes to mind is taking a road trip. Intensive reading is like trying to drive a car, but stopping every 5 feet to get out. Pull out a magnifying glass and inspect every single pebble and crack on the asphalt.
Right. You're just stuck.
You lose all your momentum and you never reach your destination. Extensive reading is just driving the car. Yes, you might hit a pothole or miss a minor landmark, but you are moving forward and you are taking in the entire landscape.
And the problem with inspecting every pebble is that you rob the brain's pattern recognition engines of the sheer volume of data they need to fire up. The benchmark Kumiko sets for this volume is substantial.
It's massive.
She advises reading roughly 10 to 15 books, which translates to about 1 million words.
1 million words?
To achieve that, she enforces one non-negotiable rule. If a book is boring, you must abandon it immediately. You cannot afford friction.
No forced slogging.
None. She also strongly advises against using bilingual books where your native language sits on the opposite page because the temptation to slip back into that intensive translation mode is simply too great.
You'll always peak. To help eliminate that friction, the source mentions a really fascinating tool that's popular in Japan. It's an app for reading Shonen Jump manga, like One Piece or Spy X Family, and it features a literal slider on the screen.
Oh, the slider app, yes.
Yeah. You can adjust the ratio of English to Japanese on the page dynamically. So you can dial it from 20% English all the way up to full English depending on your comfort level in that specific chapter. That is such a brilliant way to keep the brain engaged in the story without hitting a wall of frustration.
It's an ingenious application of the comprehensible input theory. But, introducing tools like that raises the underlying logistical challenge of this entire method.
Right, the actual doing of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Knowing the theory, understanding the need to ingest 200 hours of television and 1 million words of text is entirely different from executing it. Hitting those numbers requires a fundamental restructuring of your daily behavior.
Absolutely. And the video delves into the psychology of habit formation to explain how this is actually achievable. Because Kumiko's philosophy is incredibly blunt. Relying on motivation is a guaranteed path to failure.
Motivation is fleeting.
If you are waiting around for a sudden burst of late-night inspiration to open a book, you will never hit 1 million words. You have to aggressively engineer your environment to lower the barrier to entry. Like your headphones need to be around your neck, your manga app needs to be on your home screen. The tools must be instantly, thoughtlessly accessible.
The source leans on a very revealing statistic regarding human behavior here. Approximately 45% of everything we do on a daily basis is purely automatic.
Almost half.
It is executed without conscious, deliberate thought. The overarching goal of the 90-10 method is to migrate your consumption out of the realm of conscious effort and squarely into that 45% automatic zone.
This is your reflex.
You achieve this by weaponizing fragmented time. You don't need a 3-hour study block. You need the 10-minute commute, the 15 minutes doing the dishes, the time spent waiting in line at the grocery store.
Right.
The objective is to maintain that fragmented consistency for a minimum of 3 months. You do it until the neural pathway is so entrenched that the act of not listening to your target language feels physically uncomfortable.
Okay, so we've broken down the 90%. We understand the mechanics of the 200 hours of television, the 1 million words of extensive reading, and the absolute necessity of frictionless habit building. But we eventually have to address the remaining 10%. So what about the 10% where we actually have to speak? If we are abandoning the traditional classroom model and avoiding conversation groups, how are we supposed to practice that output?
This is where Kumiko's methodology perfectly intersects with modern technological advancements. Her answer is to utilize artificial intelligence.
Ah, of course.
You completely bypass the inherent flaws of human tutoring. Because human tutors, even the best ones, can inadvertently trigger what linguists call the affective filter.
What is that?
It's the anxiety and fear of judgment that literally blocks language production in the brain.
Oh, like when you're so nervous you forget your own name.
Precisely. And human tutors also eventually get tired of correcting the exact same mistake. Voice-to-voice AI eliminates both of those problems. It is an infinitely patient conversational partner.
It never sighs at you.
It possesses zero capacity for judgment. You can simulate a high-pressure real-world scenario like that airport immigration counter she struggled with and run it 50 times in a row until your brain is entirely desensitized to the panic.
Wow.
The source actually notes that Kumiko expressed deep, genuine envy that the current generation of learners has access to these AI tools because they perfectly isolate and solve the output dilemma.
It totally democratizes the entire process. You have a tireless, flawless sparring partner sitting right in your pocket.
It's incredible.
But, what I found most impactful about this video wasn't just the mechanics of the method, it was the personal cost of this realization for the author herself. Because when Kumiko finally synthesized all of this data, the overwhelming superiority of massive input, the necessity of self-directed study, the power of AI, it triggered a massive existential crisis for her.
It is arguably the most profound element of her entire narrative.
Oh.
We have to remember that Kumiko was not simply an academic writing theoretical books from an ivory tower.
Right.
She founded and operated a traditional brick-and-mortar language school for 15 years. Over that time, she personally oversaw the education of more than 5,000 students.
That is a legacy.
And she built that enterprise out of a genuine, deeply held desire to help people because she was heartbroken seeing talented Japanese individuals held back on the global stage purely due to communication barriers.
But she couldn't ignore the empirical evidence playing out right in front of her. The data from her own journey to fluency, combined with the struggles of those 5,000 students, forced her to confront a pretty devastating reality. She realized that her entire business model, charging people money to sit in a classroom and awkwardly force output before they had the requisite input, was fundamentally hindering their progress. The traditional classroom was the exact antithesis of the self-directed, comprehensible input method she now knew was the biological truth of skill acquisition.
It is a staggering professional contradiction to face.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what she did next is a masterclass in intellectual honesty.
It really is.
It requires immense courage to look at your life's work, acknowledge that the foundational premise is flawed based on new evidence, and completely change course.
And she didn't just quietly tweak her curriculum, she sold the school.
Exactly.
She literally dismantled her own highly successful, lucrative business because she refused to profit from a model she no longer believed in. She pivoted her entire life to focus exclusively on advocating for this self-study, input-heavy methodology.
Which serves as the ultimate validation of her framework. You don't walk away from a 15-year enterprise unless the data you've uncovered is irrefutable. She proved that true learning shouldn't be a tortured performance. It should be an inherently joyful, self-directed process of absorption.
So what does this all mean? What does it mean for you as you tackle your next learning curve? Well, if we pull all these threads together, the core takeaway is a total inversion of the academic standard. It means throwing away the flashcards and the grammar drills.
Yes, toss them out.
It means stopping the agonizing process of forcing yourself to perform a skill before your brain has built the necessary architecture. It means dedicating 90% of your energy to gorging yourself on comprehensible input, finding media you genuinely love, and letting your subconscious pattern-matching engine do the heavy lifting.
And having fun doing it.
Exactly. It means utilizing AI to handle your 10% output practice in a completely judgment-free environment. And crucially, it means engineering your daily habits so that this massive consumption becomes as thoughtless and automatic as breathing.
It completely liberates you from the anxiety of the classroom. And I think it leaves us with a highly provocative question to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have spent this deep dive exploring the mechanics of language, but I want you to look at the broader landscape of your own life. What other complex skills, whether it's learning to write code, mastering public speaking, trying to write a screenplay, or picking up a new instrument, what are you currently stalling out on because you are desperately trying to force the output?
That's a great question.
What would happen if you gave yourself permission to step back, lock yourself in, and just aggressively absorb the input until the patterns simply become a part of who you are?
You cannot perform the concert until you've absorbed the music. Do not be afraid to sit alone in the apartment and just listen for a while. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We really hope this conversation fundamentally rewires how you approach your next big challenge. Now, go find a brilliant book or a fantastic show and let your brain get to work.